Hello and welcome to Pod Songs, where we interview inspirational people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today, my guest is Blaine Reininger, and his guest is James Nice.
Oh,
Hey, Blaine, how you doing?
how are you? Your name is Jack,
Yes,
correct? Where are you?
Italy.
You're in Italy.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought somehow you were in the U.S.
I'm English originally, but I've been in Italy for 10 years now, and
Yeah, where in Italy?
about an hour and a half south of Napoli in the Cilento area. It's,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, the south.
I don't know the South so well. I know Firenze and I know Bologna and
You've been everywhere.
Rome. I always played everywhere, but I never ever really hung out any length of time in Emilia Romagna, actually, just about anywhere else. So here we are.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for agreeing to do this. It's really an honor.
Well, it's a little different than the usual stuff I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've done just about everything. So, but that's a praise indeed for something different. Yeah. That's like, I guess that's the theme of everything. That could be your motto, no?
Yeah,
Searching for something different.
I haven't gone like ski jumping on ayahuasca, or hang gliding with the AK-47 or anything like that. So I haven't done everything.
Still a few on the bucket list.
A few things lay on my bucket list. Yeah, ayahuasca, hang gliding.
And you're in Athens, yeah?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
We just had an earthquake this morning.
Oh wow.
Little tiny one.
So how's Athens at the moment? How's it? How are things now?
Athens is in an interesting state. I mean, Athens is really full of tourists anymore. It's kind of crowded with tourists here, but I don't think it's as bad as some people do. I did as much as like my wife. My wife doesn't like it. Yeah, Athens, it's fairly, compared to how it was, say 10 years ago, it's a lot better.
Yeah. I was there about 10 years ago, and it was pretty crazy. It was.
It's pretty grim. Well, in like 2009, when the crisis really hit, they were burning down whole city blocks and things. It was a mess. Firebombing theater, and it was a fucking mess. And just going shopping for amusement is a lot more interesting than it used to be. I mean, for a while there, the shops were looking kind of Soviet, had like no inventory, so it was not very entertaining. But now, it's better.
Okay. And are you in Italy sometime as well, or are you just permanently in Athens?
Well, I mean, I did a little tour of Italy in October, and I'm going to do another couple of gigs. I'm going to play in Bologna anyway next month.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I have friends in Italy, and I have interest there. I mean, my latest album came out with an Italian label. Label it Piacenza. So,
and with this band 24 Hours, you've been collaborating as well. This psychedelic progressive band.
Who's that?
24 Hours. So.
I don't. Then maybe I know them.
Oh, it's on your Wikipedia page. It can't be trusted, maybe.
I don't know who that might be. I mean, I get a lot of like online sessions. People come and they want me to play violin on this project and that.
Right.
I don't always.
It's hard to remember what you've been.
I don't always remember who they are. Well, it's like 2 hours of my life, and
yeah.
I work, and I do something online. I play violin solo on a couple tracks, or maybe sing.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Yeah. A gun for hire.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. I mean, that's part of my job. I'm a professional musician.
Yeah.
Anybody's willing to pay me. I need money.
Sure. Yeah. Especially, these days where, sales have gone down, your money from streaming is not very much at all. So
yeah, well, it's interesting we're going to talk to James.
Yeah.
Because he's a record company.
Right,
he is my record company. He's been my record company for as long as for many years, really. And he is, I don't know if you know anything about him. You said you wanted to know some things about James.
Yeah, because he's an interesting character. Now he's James Haywood is his pen name. He's also a very successful writer as well.
That's right, yes.
And he also has a record company, manages the record company he used to work for, the Disques.
Well, he basically, he basically took over the brand, as it were. I mean,
okay.
The brand was just, and some of the artists, of course, like he and Anna Domino and Vinnie Riley, and some other people, various other people.
Cult artists. Yeah,
Isabel and these other people from Crepuscule. He re-released their back catalogs. But he had a label for some years before that called Le Temps Moderne. That he ran it as kind of a hobby in a way. I mean, he released things like piano music by Eric Satie and kind of obscure things. And then the tempo of the record company kind of picked up, and he ended up. He can tell you better than I. But he ended up kind of picking up the slack from Factory, and he ended up kind of representing, some of the lesser known acts from Factory.
That's the Factory Records from Manchester, yeah.
Yes, other acts that were not New Order. In other words, everybody else that wasn't New Order, and so he inherited that. Because, there was a connection between Factory and Crepuscule in Belgium. The Disques de Crepuscule was the European, licensee or the European face of Factory Records. And so there was considerable communication between them and Brussels, And at that point, a lot of musicians were coming to Brussels to record because there were state-of-the-art recording studios available, and engineers and musicians and everything else for a lot less money than it cost to work in England. And of course, it meant a trip to Europe. I mean, for English musicians to come hang around and meet Belgian women and drink Belgian beer and be somewhere besides England. So there was a lot of that. So that's what James went to work for Crepuscule, and I was signed as an artist at Crepuscule, and he was working there. I don't exactly remember when he started. We became friends, and he would come over to our house for dinner. I mean, he was just out of university. I mean, he was a young man. My wife would cook for him, and he'd come hang around, watch television with us in our house.
So you were there at that time. Must have been a incredibly stimulating time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wanted to talk to James about primarily,
Yeah.
about the ancient times in Brussels. I mean, it was an interesting time. You know, there were there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. I mean, it was not only I find out later some of the other stuff that was going on. I mean, there was our whole scene. You know, there was the Crepuscule scene and the people working there and the factory people coming over. And there was a venue called Blaine where like everybody played, you know, to see when we played there, that's how we came to know these people. You know, and Bauhaus and the Psychedelic Furs and all of these English bands came over, they would play there. And these people at Crepuscule, I mean, they were intimately connected to that venue. And so there was a lot of that going on. But I also know there's a lot of other things going on that were not part of our scene. I mean, you know, Marvin Gaye had recorded, you know, Stan, his last record, I suppose, with Belgian engineers. I mean, I recorded in that same studio at one point later. And I don't know, the guys that kind of invented Euro disco, there were Belgians involved in a lot of that. You know, you had these guys named Telex. They were, you know, a Belgian band. They had, you know, we worked with them because they had gear that we didn't have access to. I mean, they had samplers. They had samplers in 1983, whenever that was, 82, 83. We used their samplers to record a ballad from Maurice Béjart. You know, we sampled these bits of Greta Garbo's voice. So there was a lot of other stuff going on in Belgium somehow at that time.
I had a good conversation with Elliot Murphy. He's an American musician. He moved to Paris, and had his second career there. Took off again, and it's really interesting. These are American artists who come up who feel like yourself, who have more. They feel more at home in Europe than they do back there.
Yeah, right. It also has to do with it. You get, or at least until recently, and maybe not so much now, that you got more respect than you ever would in the United States. And it's the same thing that happened with the old Miles Davis.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't let Miles Davis in the front door in some of the clubs in America, and he came here and they said, "Oh, le grand génial, Dieu si génial, Miles." Yeah, you see, you know, treat him like a genius, and they just treat him like, you know, the help.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, that was true for us. And when we got a certain amount of that, I mean, we were playing in bars in America. We were part of the scene in New York in the late 70s, you know, with a lot of people that became millionaires besides us, you know, like Basquiat and these other people, you know, floating around in that scene, as were we at the time. But, you know, we were playing I mean, a lot of the bars in New York at the time were just scum holes. I mean, they were just a basement somewhere that you didn't notice because you're so drunk or so stuck. You know, you thought you're having a good time, and it's so dark in there you couldn't see that it was just a sewer in there. You know, this fucking filthy. The Mud Club was just a dive. You know, and CBGB's and Max's Kansas City smelled like all the pee in the world had been deposited there. It's amazing. Rock and roll pee, you know. And so we came to Europe, and suddenly we're working with La Maison de la Culture, and we're commissioned to do ballet from Maurice Béjart, and it's just another old world, you know, different story entirely. Also, we played our share of scum holes too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, don't know why Miles Davis ever went back. At least yeah.
Well, you know, this is interesting. I mean, let's tell everything before James even comes
Yeah,
up.
keep your powder dry.
Yeah, but I can understand. I mean, this is something I've had to deal with. Is it's like homesickness or nostalgia, or feeling like you're a fish out of water, or a man without country. And then and then you realize, on the surface, you think, well, it's all the Western world. It's all, they have all the same food, and they watch the same television shows. But there are big differences in culture. Come somewhere like Greece, I find out about it all the time, about my cultural assumptions, and of course it's good for me as a human that I can't make these assumptions, these kind of imperialist assumptions about my culture, that my culture is superior, especially English people as well, had that notion. They go live among some other people and they consider themselves superior. Yeah, you learn and by that people have other ideas about how things should be done.
Yeah, it's a huge education. I left England when I was 20. I lived in Holland for 10 years, and then now I've been in Italy for 10 years, and I don't feel homesick really for England, or I really like the life in mainland Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I like to go to England now and again, but England is rough. England is cruel.
Yes.
England is cruel. It's like America,
Yeah.
If you don't have the money, I mean, you're just fucked. There's nowhere for you to be. Your options are very limited. You can't do anything. You can't rent a house. You can't live. You can't afford food, and you can't pay your bills. I mean, you can more or less do that in Europe. I mean, I've been able to do these things. I would never be able to do that in England, and I doubt that I'd be able to do these things in America either. Not and being a musician, not have that as my only job.
Yeah, I know. I live in Italy for a fraction of the cost I would in Northern Europe. You grow your own vegetables.
But yeah, you're in the South. I mean, that must be another whole story.
Yeah, it's really, we don't have a mortgage. Because my girlfriend's an architect, and the family owned the land, so she built it with her connections. So yeah, it's really just completely different.
You have a source of income from elsewhere.
Yeah, I do some writing as well, some freelance writing and translation, and you need to, just because.
Of course. I mean, you're not going to get a job.
I mean, it's great. I can do it because there's no cost to releasing music now. You can distribute for free. If I had to press CDs or vinyl for every week, forget about it. But this way, we can release music, send it to the other side of the world for free, basically. And okay, you don't make any money from it, just a handful of cents, but.
Well, the idea of eking some kind of living from music online, I mean, it's been very important to me. I mean, I don't make massive amounts of money, but I get money from Patreon every month.
Right.
And it's not massive, but I use that money to buy things, to buy food, to buy medicine, and I mean, it's like having a pension, which I don't have. And it spurs my creativity. I mean, part of my Patreon, the Blaine Reininger promise is that I will provide 3 unreleased songs a month to my Patreon patrons, which, has been an immense stimulus to my creativity. And I have a huge mass of songs that have now been released. I mean, I can, that's why the last CD I released with James, and the last 3 CDs I released with James were double CDs.
Wow.
The last CD I did with him had 28 tracks on it. And that was after I eliminated more than half. I initially had to sort through like 60 to get those 28.
Wow, you're so productive. Also, your website, I was delving deep into that. That's a magnum opus.
Yeah, that's a labor unto itself. I mean, I started it before there was, social media, before there was any, and I never had the idea that anybody ever saw it at all. But, I started doing a blog before they call it blog. I started, because I've always kept a journal, and I don't do so much anymore. But, I would upload whole journal pages that were written in HTML, and post them to my website. And then I had to write the code for the blog, and it was not automatic. I had to engineer it myself, and of course, as time has gone by, I have a wider audience on social media, and so the website has kind of faded in this importance in my life. I mean, I tried to do some things on the website just to keep it going, even when I'm not posting regularly. I have like these RSS feeds that post to website pages. I also maintain the TUXEDOMOON website, and I have to find a way to keep it fresh content without necessarily having the time to go there all the time. It needs to be it's already kind of needs to be upgraded, I think.
Yeah.
It's all of my websites are just kind of basically HTML. I taught myself HTML. I mean, I got an internet capable computer for the first time in 1998. It was a Pentium processor. And I found a tutorial online that showed you how to post a picture of a cat. How to make a web page that you post a picture of a cat. And so I saw that web, I learned how to do that, and then I was set myself loose.
Yeah, you just got this stream of creativity coming out through you, and I guess you need to find an outlet all the time.
I guess that's true. I guess that's true. Sometimes I don't realize it. It's not that way for everybody.
No.
And I sometimes think, that's just what everybody can do. It's not necessarily true.
No. Yeah, it really comes and goes for me. I do. When I have to get too wrapped up in day to day, but I really admire someone like yourself who's had the creative stamina to do. I mean, you formed TUXEDOMOON in 1977. Yeah, that's the year I was born. Yeah, and you've been going all this time consistently. So, I have big respect for you.
Well, thank you. I mean, it has not always been the easiest path. I mean, that's what I tell young people. Let's say, they want to pursue a career in music. I said, you better be sure. I said, don't do it unless it's like you have to. Because you're not going to get rich. You might be, Lady Gaga or St. Vincent, or I don't know, somebody that gets some attention and makes some money. But the odds are you won't be. The odds are he won't even be Tuxedo Moon. I mean, we were lucky that we were in the right place at the right time. I mean, we were playing gigs in San Francisco just when the zeitgeist was ready for what we were preaching. Yeah. And we got picked up, and there were plenty of bands that didn't come out of that scene. Not that we had this massive success, but we've had a kind of a sustaining, momentum that sustained us for almost 50 years, one way or another. Now, me and Steven, really, I mean, Steven's on the other side of the world, Steven Brown. He's in kind of an analogous situation to mine. I mean, he lives in Mexico, and he gets a lot of the same kind of work that I do. He works, he will like write theater music or dance, things like that, or he will do shows or concerts with his local boys. It's a similar situation to mine.
Are you still working together? Are you still producing?
Not really. I mean, the last thing we did together has been, now it's been like 8 years ago. I went to Mexico in 2014, and we recorded some new music. We released a CD or kind of violin and piano thing. That's the last time I worked with him, really. I mean, we did some Tuxedo Moon. We kept doing Tuxedo Moon until Peter died. And that was pretty much it. That was, really the literal.
You need the three of you to have the magic, to be the.
Well, we needed Peter. I mean, Peter's like the bass player at Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
He's like a lot of people in bands. I mean, a lot of times you'll have two people that are at each other's throats all the time, and you have to have like a third person to believe, to everybody.
Yeah.
That was what Peter was.
Yeah. For the stool to stand up, you need the three legs. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was just working now. I just tried to stop. I was working on a new thing. You can't see it other than my camera won't move. I mean, my gear is all here. My studio, my guitar, and my instruments here. They're out. I was working. I've been in the theater. I've been working in the theater for the last 5 months. And theater takes up a lot of your time. Takes up all your time, really. You can't do anything else. And now I'm sort of back to normal. Now I'm back in a position where I can write every day. I can compose every day.
So what's your next project?
I have some shows. That's the next, I have some shows in Greece. I have a show in Vienna. At the end of the month, by next week, go to Vienna and do 1 month.
Is it solo or with a band?
I don't have a band per se. I mean, I have one other guy I work with. This guy, Giorgio Valentino, was a guitar player. And then I have a lot of my stuff. It's on my laptop. If I could afford a band, I would have a band. But no one pays enough money, and it comes down to, another guy equals another hotel room and another plane ticket and another meal and another mouse to feed. And people just won't pay me enough money now to do that. If I could travel with a band, I certainly would. I mean, I far prefer it to work on my recorded backups and things. I like to I do as much as possible just live. It's two guitar players, and we do a big section of the show where it's just two guitars and me singing. But I worked with some local guys, some great musicians a little while ago, a couple of years ago. And this guy was like, he's like a gunslinger, a real gunslinger, guitar player that I met. And then we got a bunch of other gunslingers. We got a bass player and a drummer. And I taught those guys some of my songs, man, it was great. It was great. I had a really fucking great time. And then I recently played with something like an orchestra. I mean, there was a thing that's called the Song for Greece. That was some of the song I wrote for that is on my new album. They commissioned a bunch of local composers, musicians to write a song to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Greek independence, and I had like an orchestra backing me as I sang.
Wow.
So that was pretty great. There he is.
Hi, how are you?
I'm all right. Welcome to my world. We had a little earthquake this morning.
Oh dear, everything all right? Everything still seems to be on the wall.
Yeah, that's the only way I really knew it was happening. I saw one of the pictures on the living room wall was kind of hanging kind of loose. It was not big. It was 4.4, but it's 80 kilometers away or something.
I mean, is that something you have on an annual basis, or is it once in a blue moon?
Oh, it's like California in its way. I mean, we have kind of little tremors, now and again. It's an earthquake zone here. So we've been talking already, probably covered some of the ground we wanted to cover.
Yeah.
Already.
And is my sound and vision, is that okay? I've sort of made an effort to arrange things so that I've got a background that isn't just...
Yeah, it looks great. Yeah.
Okay, super. Good to meet you, Jack.
Pleased to meet you too. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
No, that's all right. Where are you?
I'm in Italy.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So you're midway between...
I am. I'm breaching the divide, yeah.
You sound English to me.
I am English. I'm originally from near Cambridge, Bury St Edmunds.
Oh, I know Bury very well. I'm in the middle of Norfolk, so...
Ah, right.
Yeah, no, I was down there. I go down there probably once a month for work anyway. So, in fact, I was there last week.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so how long have you been in Italy?
Oh, about 10 years now. Yeah, my girlfriend's Italian and brought me back. And yeah, I couldn't think of a good enough reason to leave. I guess that's the same reason that Blaine's in Athens now. Love. one sort of another.
Well, the funny thing about me is, everything's funny about me. Most of the expatriate types I meet around here did come here for love, right? They came holiday and they fell in love. And that's not my case at all. I came here for work. I'm one of the rare people that actually came to Greece because the job opportunities were greater than where I was at the time. So I came here for the sake of work, and love came later. So,
well, I guess Blaine, heartbreak came before love.
Well, yeah, all of that. I mean, of course, the grand tragedy of my life. JJ died after we'd been here for 4 months. And it was kind of a mess for a long time.
I didn't remember that it was that soon after you went to Athens. I just didn't realize it was so sudden after that. Was it anything to do with the sort of different altitude and the different air and things?
Oh no, she had a heart condition that kind of just appeared on its own, and they call it idiopathic, and that just means we don't know what the hell it is or where it comes from or why, but it was the pulmonary artery became enlarged, and eventually that just killed her, and it moved very quickly. It was like a railroad train. I mean, they first appeared in like December of 97. And by July of 98, she was dead. So it was very quick, you know, and boom. So there was all of that. I mean, it took me really quite a long time to get back into, you know, songwriting. You know, I didn't want to do any of that shit. And it's only been like recently that I actually started writing songs again, you know, songs with lyrics, you know, to be sung.
But you've overcome adversity in the past before when it came to actually writing music. And this is a suspiciously smooth segue into an artifact that I decided to bring along to this meeting today. So
Yes.
It's on a coat hanger, and doubt if you recognize this.
But is that coat you got from me? Does it still have the blood stains on it?
Yeah, do you want to introduce what this jacket is, Blaine?
Well, I mean, that's the jacket I was wearing the night I had my accident in Amsterdam. I mean, I'd gone to Amsterdam to play a solo show, you know, and it was a long fucking story. I mean, I had no money and they wouldn't give me any food, but they would give me whiskey, you know, and so I'm sitting there and drinking bourbon all day and I had nothing to eat. So we did the show and the show went off all right. And, you know, I could always perform drunk, you know. And so after the show, I had a little bit of money in like a shoulder bag, and I was going to find a croquette, you know, Amsterdam, it was the Leidseplein. I was going to find the automat there and just get a couple croquettes and eat them. And I see some guy walking down the street, and I say, hey, how do I get to the automat? I want to get something to eat. He said, oh, follow me. And then he grabbed my shoulder bag. And this had all my painfully acquired, you know, whatever it was, 450 guilders or 750 maybe. And I said, you little motherfucker. And I was drunk, and also me and Peter had just had some good time beating the hell out of some other guy. So I thought, I'm going to catch this little fuck. I'm going to beat the hell out of him. And I think, you better stop, you little fucker. And I'm chasing him. Whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm not watching where I'm going. And he's just a little skinny junkie, I suppose. And he threw my bag down in the street. He didn't want to tangle with me. And that's the last thing I saw. It kind of momentum carried me out into the street. And I got hit by a car, evidently. And evidently that car ran over my right hand. And, you know, I don't know what I'm trying to stop it. The car is being driven by a guy named Jesus. And that's the thing. I woke up in a hospital, you know, in a hospital in Amsterdam. Of course, I was stoned out of my mind, so I was having a good time. And I was wearing that coat.
And this coat, I think this jacket began life as a bus driver's jacket in Leeds or something like that, bizarrely. It looks quite futuristic, quite Star Trek, but it's actually made by Burton Tailoring.
Well, that jacket is also given to me by Michael Nolte.
He was a promoter. If you look closely above the Burton maker's mark, there's actually some dry blood.
I bet my blood is still there. All right. I wondered if you kept the blood stain. You can clone me.
Well, I can't fit in that jacket, so there's no point in getting it.
Well, I couldn't fit in there now either. I mean, I was pretty skinny in those days, you know.
And then after that accident, that was the kind of inspiration, certainly for the title of your first solo album in 1982, which was called Broken Fingers, which had an X-ray of your broken hand on the cover.
Absolutely. Well, that also came because while I was convalescing from the accident in Rotterdam, I was reading a novel by William Burroughs called Dead Fingers Talk. And JJ saw me sitting there reading this with this contraption attached to my hand. I had like these little wires coming out with wine corks attached to them, keep me from poking my eye out when I slept. She said, that's a hell of a book for you to be reading with your fingers like that. Huh? Dead Fingers Talk. And so that the lyrics in the song say, you know, broken fingers talk. So I lifted part of that from Burroughs.
I was going to mention William S. Burroughs at some point in this conversation, but you've beaten me to the punch.
Yeah. Well, do you want me to give you these questions, or did they just elicit some brainstorming?
Well, I expect you sent me some questions over, and I've sort of thought about some answers. I don't know how detailed you want me to be. I mean, I think really probably this conversation is more about you, Blaine, than me, because you're infinitely more interesting than I am. So by all means, ask me those questions.
The first question I have here is, what made you decide to move to Brussels, and what were you doing just before?
Well, I'm a little bit younger than you, Blaine. I'm still 27, haha. I was at university and I was living in Scotland. I was a big fan of Crepuscule. I was a sort of pseudo-intellectual. I'd been turned on to that when I moved to Edinburgh. And I was really interested in TUXEDOMOON in particular. And so I'd sort of worshipped the band from afar, really. And while I was at university, I had a record label called LTM. I did a couple of compilation albums, and on the first of those, there was a TUXEDOMOON song called Shelved Dreams. And I came over to Brussels to get a copy of the master tape. And I think I stayed with Martin Jouwerbaum, who was the manager of the group then. And then the next year I did another compilation, and that had a Winston Tong track on. So I think I repeated the exercise. And I came over and I met you on one of those trips. I can't remember which. And I came around to your flat and met JJ as well. Anna Domino I met. And I went up to Apeldoorn in Holland with TUXEDOMOON. This was during the time when you were in the band. And so these two trips, which were very, very short, an awful lot of incredibly exciting stuff seemed to happen. So I decided in my third year at university that when I left, I would move over to Brussels. I fondly imagined it would be like going to Paris in the 1920s. It was full of avant-garde artists. It was going to be like Ernest Hemingway's Paris in the 20s. And also, I picked up the idea that it was very cheap to live there. The rents were incredibly cheap. And I think Nina Shaw, who was the lighting person for TUXEDOMOON at the time, she had this strange little attic apartment that was almost free. There was barely any rent that she paid. I don't think there was any running water or anything like that, but that all just seemed incredibly romantic to me. So I thought I'd go to Brussels for 9 months or a year and just soak it up. I didn't have any firm plan. And that's how I turned up in the summer of 1987. And I think you very kindly put me up, put up with me for 2 or 3 weeks until I found accommodation of my own.
Well, yeah, I don't remember exactly how you got assimilated into the board, as it were. I mean, I guess that was it then. If you were going to a gig with us, you would have been part of the horizon to me. You know, so here to tell jokes too, you know. and so I could see how you end up being like assimilated. So that's it. I mean, you didn't end up with Crepuscule until later on. Then you didn't.
It was very soon, because I found that my money wasn't lasting as long as I thought it might. So fairly quickly, through a guy called Jonas who was working at
Crepuscule. Jonas.
He told me that the mail order was in a mess. So lots of people had sent money to the label to buy records and posters and things. And the label wasn't sending anybody any records and posters because there was no one to do it. So I think my first job was sorting out this mountain of backed up mail order. and sending it out. And I met Michel, and he thought I would be useful, I guess not least because I spoke English. So that was my foot in the door, just being a freelancer doing the mail order. But fairly soon I'm not going to say I went on the payroll at Crepuscule, because it was all a little bit sketchy about the status of employment. But I worked there for about 9 months full time. And then after that, there was a bit of an argument, as there tended to be at Crepuscule. And then I sort of was someone that did projects with them rather than being in the office every day. But it was a very exciting 9 months. And I think one of the questions you asked was, what was it like working with Michel Duval, who was the main founder of Crepuscule? But before I answer that, I think you used to call him the Kingfish, didn't you?
I used to call him a lot of things. That was maybe one of the kindest things I called him. He still is. I don't know what he's like now. He was quite a character. I mean, he was very kind of a rascal, in my opinion. He was like a Loki kind of figure,
I don't think that's very fair. I mean, Michel started the label along with a couple of other people. The label started in 1980 as sort of an offshoot of, well, kind of related to Factory Records. It was two labels, Factory Benelux, which was going to release Factory Records in Benelux, and then Crepuscule was more an attempt to have a really cosmopolitan, international arts label and almost an arts movement in Brussels. So he very much encouraged people to come to Brussels from abroad and to collaborate with each other. And I think he was a really interesting catalyst, I would say. But I guess, like many other people, because he was a catalyst, my relationship with him at that time was quite explosive. And it certainly exploded after 9 months. But I still communicate with him almost on a weekly basis. We still do a few projects together. So I owe him, and I owe Crepuscule really pretty much all of my subsequent music career. I owe a lot of that to you as well, because you were a big supporter of mine when I was young. But really, the whole of my music career since the mid-'80s has been based on that 9 months I spent working at Crepuscule with Michel. I learned a lot. So it was a real formative experience.
Yeah, I mean, Michel, at one point, Michel wanted me to be something like an analog of Vinnie Riley. I mean, Tony Wilson kind of kept Vinnie Riley. Vinnie Riley had what would you call it, a retainer, an honorarium. I mean, Tony Wilson paid his rent and his bills, and he didn't expect to make his money back off of Vinnie's record sales. And so in that way, Michel Duval thought, well, I'm going to be a patron to Blaine in that way. And well, he actually was for a while, but it didn't last longer than a few months, really, before he kind of spaced it out and went on to other things. But there for a while, he made me like the house producer at Crepuscule. And so there would be all these sessions going on. There was a little studio called Little Big One, a recording studio somewhere there in Brussels. And various people would be there at various times. For instance, he did a project called Moving Soundtracks, and he got all the people that were involved with his label at the time, and that was the Pale Fountains and Isabel Antenna and Wim Martins and me and Tuxedo Moon and the whole bunch of us, and I was in the studio for all of that, and I may not have been entirely producer, but I played bass with Isabel Antenna, and I played keyboards with Wim Martins, and I would sing with somebody else, or I'd do my own thing, and I was doing that kind of stuff with all the Crepuscule productions. for a while, you know, for some.
That was a really interesting album, Moving Soundtracks. It was a compilation that was people doing updates and versions of movie scores. So some of it was songs from films and some of it was instrumentals. And I still love the cover version you did of the Georges Delarue theme from Le Mépris, Contempt.
Yeah, I've actually seen that movie and it bored the shit out of me. I couldn't stand it. But oh my God, that's the only interesting thing about this movie is that song. Except,
I disagree, but I think
that's me. That's my taste. I don't like French cinema anyway.
But you did do some interesting projects as a producer, and I mean, I still have some of them on catalog. And one of those is the East and West mini album by Anna Domino, which is a really nice, very minimal album. And I think at certain points over the years, Anna's sort of almost disowned it, but it's now her most popular record by a long chalk because it just captures a moment and an atmosphere. And you're the co-producer on that. And I know you tend to minimize this as well, but you also did some pretty important work with the Dorée column. You did 2 albums with them. I mean, one was an album called Short Stories for Pauline, which has your viola over quite a lot of it. And then you were invited to Manchester to record and be very prominent on their 4th album, Without Mercy, and you played with the group as well. And I think you tend to think of that as just something you did for a few days, but actually out there in sort of record land and in the culture, you're playing a violin and viola with a Dorée column. It's quite a big thing.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard for me to know what impact my activities have in the world. I mean, I enjoyed that trip immensely. I mean, it was, you know, not exactly the utter peak of the Manchester scene, but I mean, the Hacienda was still running and Tony Wilson was still, you know, flitting around Manchester, you know, and I got to hang around with him for a few days, you know, and at one point, what you call the tailpiece gut on my viola broke. I mean, it's a little piece of gut, sheep gut, that holds the tailpiece, that holds the instrument together. It holds the strings to the body of the instrument. And the tailpiece gut broke. And I said, Tony, you know, my tailpiece gut is broken. He said, oh, yeah. Let's get in my car. Let's fix it. You know, come on, Lee, let's go. Yes. Driving all over Manchester trying to find a tailpiece gut with this guy. He had this a saddlebag from a horse, from a postal horse. It had like 2 big bags, a big strip of leather that's meant to go over the horse. And that was his bag. Then he goes, flip this enormous thing over his shoulder and get in his car. Let's go. You know, he's a very intrepid guy. And the thing was, there was no kind of snobism about him. You know, he was very kind of, you know, down to earth guy. You didn't get the impression of this is a guy that made Joy Division. You know, I mean, this is the boss. This is the owner of Factory Records. He's, you know, a legend in his own time. He's just, you know, a guy, and he would be the one to drive me around looking to fix my viola. You know, and so I had a good time on that trip.
Do you think you hadn't been living in another country? Do you think that's a collaboration that you would have liked to have continued longer, or for you was it really just a session?
With Vinny? Well, you know, to be honest, I mean, I liked working with Vinny and I liked his guitar playing, but personally speaking, Vinny was kind of too ephemeral for me to feel much of a bond with, you know? It's like working with an elf. So, you know, I mean, he was this strange little character, you know, and he was not gregarious. You know, I can be gregarious and telling jokes and hey, And he was a little bit like, whoa, So, I mean, I enjoyed the work, I enjoyed going back and forth to England and playing. Also, when we played at that Riverside Studios there in London, that was all great. It was always a great trip. It was great also to get out of Brussels. It was great to go to England. I mean, unlike anybody I know, I actually like England. I like to go there. I mean, I like to go to London. I like England as for being England, but I also like the fact that everybody speaks my language, for Christ's sake. I mean, it gets really boring after almost 50 years to know if you shout something on the street, maybe only 3% of the people are going to know what you're shouting about. I can go out and say, my dick's on fire. Help, help. Nobody's going to know what the hell I'm saying, in Greece or in Brussels. Of course, Brussels has changed, When we first got to Brussels, nobody spoke English. Nobody, except for the people that did speak English were young and they didn't count. I mean, people in any kind of position of power, from like a taxi driver to a bank clerk to a post clerk or a cop, didn't speak a fucking word of English, And so it was very difficult, And we had trouble with that all up and down the line. I mean, we get in a taxi and the guy would say, okay, where are you going? We say, numéro 4, Rue Marc. We say, Rue Marc. He say, quoi? We say, Rue Marc. Say, quoi? Oh, why didn't you say so? And take us there. But that's one thing I actually like about England. It's just, my culture is kind of derived from English culture in its way.
Last time I went to Brussels, I went and had a beer in my favorite bar. And I was trying to be clever and I asked for a wheat beer. And I meant a wheat beer, like a German wheat beer, but they thought I'd ordered 8 beers. So,
wheat.
But I think my language issue when I lived there was a bit different to yours, because you're right. I mean, it wasn't, English wasn't something that was spoken that much. And I think that's why I got the job at Crepuscule, because it was a skill that I had, if you can call it a skill, which not many others did. And it's certainly why I then went to work at Play It Again, Sam, for about 4 years, because it was useful having someone doing the job I was doing who spoke English. But I think for me, it was quite limiting, because I basically hung around with you and other expats who were either American or English or Irish. And there were quite a lot of people in Brussels who worked for the European Union or NATO, or who were from families connected with that I spent most of my 4 or 5 years in Brussels just hanging out with people who spoke English. And I didn't have to interact with other people that much. And that was because I was lazy, but it was also very limiting as well. And it's probably one of the reasons that ultimately I only stayed for 4 or 5 years, which seemed like an eternity, because I didn't properly put down roots or really establish a proper, nourishing, meaningful social network there.
Of course, we had our little crew there in Brussels. We would have like family gatherings of various sorts. We'd have dinner at somebody's house, and there would be this whole crew there, and it'd be all the same people a lot of the time, and they all spoke English. It would be like the TUXEDOMOON crew, or expanded beyond that. It all tended to be the same people, but I guess it's that way anywhere on like the art scene. I mean, that's the one thing about the Brussels scene. I don't know if people even realize. I mean, there was one moment when it seemed like the Brussels scene was poised to become something to really blossom forth, you know. I mean, Crepuscule had this kind of an empire in the center of Brussels. You know, they were working with a record distribution company called Himalaya, right? And so they had taken over a building right in the center of Brussels. And on one floor was a record shop. The next floor was like a clothing designer. And the top floor was the record company. And in the attic was TUXEDOMOON rehearsal space, right? And over in the Grand Place, they had taken over a cafe called Enterré. And like Hurrah in New York, it was one of the first places to feature videos. It's like a video wall. There was videos playing all the time, and people came in because that was as hip as you could be, right? They come to Enterré and they watch some videos, and they sit there and drink and watch videos. And then there was a performance space upstairs where various people would come over from like England, America, what have you, and perform. So it was very buzzing there for a while, you know, in the center of Brussels. That sort of Crepuscule hub was really something.
Yeah, certainly when I first came to visit, that was what it was like. And I think by the time 2 years later, when I moved over, that was starting to tail off a bit. But it was still really exciting for me. I mean, I was only 21 years old. So an awful lot of what I was seeing and experiencing, I didn't really fully understand. But like I say, it was a very formative experience for me. And it's why I've done what I've done for 40 years. But I did fall out with, I had a big argument with Michelle. I think it was an argument about something to do with 23 Skidoo. I can't remember exactly what, but I just walked out of the office. I don't think it was the first time I'd done that, but it was the last time I did it. And I just left. And I got on a train the next day and went to Amsterdam. It must have been something that had already been arranged because William Burroughs was visiting. And I guess he must have been doing some readings. So I got on the train and went to Amsterdam and was received by Burroughs in his hotel along with a bunch of other sort of interesting people. So even though I just quit my job with no plan at all, it all seemed like it was all still incredibly exciting because I was off on the train to go and meet William Burroughs, who I'd already released an album by. Yeah, I mean, it was just a really fascinating, formative time, and I'm so glad I did it. But ultimately, I only stayed for about 4 or 5 years. I got to the age of 25, and I thought at that time that was too old to be working in music. I mean, that seems ridiculous to look back on, but I figured that, well, you know, I should move aside and not let younger people do it. But I really figured that it wasn't something that made sense for me to carry on doing. But I don't know, is that what I said at the time, or did you think there was some?
I don't know what you said at the time. I don't know. I mean, I just know at one point you were there and then you were gone. You know, I didn't know exactly why you wanted to move along. But you know, me, you know, I became more and more of a hermit as time went by here in Brussels. You know, I mean, this is something I think about a lot and something I wonder about. I mean, as the scene, it seemed to me the scene kind of started to decay. It kind of, you know, it had risen, and for a while it was stimulating and exciting, and then as such things will go. You know, the ghost zeitgeist moved elsewhere, or you know, the Crepuscule. You know, the Crepuscule megalith dissolved, it dissipated. I don't know. They ran out of cocaine. I don't know what happened, but the scene kind of folded in upon itself. It's just not as much happening. And I personally, you know, I liked being in Brussels. I liked being in Europe to a certain extent, but I also had what I now describe as kind of a pathological, a nostalgia that bordered on pathology. You know, I missed America so desperately, you know, that it was a sickness. And it became part of a very deep and dark depression for me.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I don't remember you being homesick for America.
Well, I wouldn't admit it. I wouldn't admit that I was anything but, you know, word about yeah. That I was anything but, you know, and Frenchman, I was not Ernest Hemingway, you know, living in the life of the expatriate, but some of the songs that I wrote at that time, like A Letter from Home, right? If you know that song, the original lyrics were, oh, sometimes you miss someplace so much you want to lay down and die. And, you know, and Stephen Kramer said, God damn, that's dark. I said, well, maybe I should change it. And then when I think back on it, you know, I missed my friends. I missed my country, really.
Do you think, though, that you're inventing a narrative that is a little distorted? Because on your, what I think is your signature album, which is
Yes.
which I sold 2 copies of today, by the way. They will that will be reflected in your next royalty statement. But there is a song on there called Birthday Song, which I think that was around in certainly around in 1982, because Tuxedo Moon did it first. And that is a song which seems already very jaded about the Brussels experience.
Well, I had been living in San Francisco, California, man, and we have been doing well. I mean, we were one of the top bands in San Francisco. You know, people thought of us in the same. We moved in like exalted circles in San Francisco. It's not that easy to do. You know, we had come up. And we were like on top, you know, we were like local royalty. And then Steven and Peter like, this town sucks. You know, let's go to New York. And I don't want to do that. I hate New York. It's cold. I mean, we're in California, man. I mean, the Beach Boys. I mean, you know, it's sunny. The people die to come live here. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Why do you want to leave? You know, it's too easy, said Steven. You know, and so I thought, okay, my band is moving, and I guess I better move with them, which is what I did. You know, but we got to Europe, I mean, and we got to Rotterdam. It came winter, and I had never, you know, I'm from Colorado, and you either got the scorching sun or you have snow, and it doesn't rain really every once in a while. And there I am in Rotterdam, and it's winter, and it's like 0 degrees, and it's raining, and you know, the sky is gray for weeks on end. And then, what the hell kind of place is this? What is this? Why do I want to be here? You know, and then by the time we got to Brussels, you know, it was winter. I mean, in the summer it was all right. Brussels, okay, not bad. Then came the winter, like, look at where we are, and I got no money, you know, and no prospect of getting any money. I can't go anywhere. I mean, my life at that time, the difference between what Brussels means to me now and what it meant to me then is enormous. I mean, all of these people say, oh, do you ever go to that restaurant, the Grand Place, that place that has a nice carbonade? And then, well, you know, I've been there since 2006 when I actually had some money in my pocket to go to a restaurant. But the whole time I lived there, I didn't know any fucking restaurants. I mean, my wife would go buy a canned mackerel. It cost 20 francs a can. It was like, you know, 30p. And she would make wonton with canned mackerel and feed 4 people with it. And we didn't go to any fucking restaurant. We didn't have any money. I mean, Michael Belfer, one of the guitar players from TUXEDOMOON, woke up one morning and there's nothing to eat in his house except cornstarch. And so he made cornstarch soup. You know? he put it in some water with some salt, and that he ate that because he didn't have any money.
Well, I seem to remember now you mention it that I did use your house as a restaurant quite a lot.
Well, you know, it's because JJ was really a good survival cook. She could make a meal out of like nothing, you know. And so we would go to Aldi, and Aldi would have like a special on chicken wings, and you get like, you know, 30 chicken wings for 200 francs or something. And so we'd buy a big mess of chicken wings and bake them in the oven, and we invite everybody over to eat, you know, because then we had food. Because JJ was good at this kind of survival cuisine.
No, that's absolutely true. And I mean, you're talking about when the group moved over from San Francisco to Brussels via shortish periods in New York and Rotterdam. So I think you were in Brussels 1981, I guess, is when you actually arrived there. And prior to that, so you'd done a couple of albums on the Residence label. And then there was a good licensing deal for some things in England. And then you came to Brussels, and it became, you were associated with Crepuscule, but also releasing different records on different labels. And I mean, my perception at the time was that TUXEDOMOON were going to be like the Velvet Underground in years to come. It was this sort of, I mean, there might not have been an Andy Warhol in the background, but it was this interesting, daring avant-garde group that also had some good tunes. And there happened to be someone playing a violin in there as well, which is an comparator. But I wonder if one of the reasons why TUXEDOMOON isn't perhaps as renowned now as the Velvet Underground is that it was all a bit too complicated and a bit difficult, and that things were made more difficult than they needed to be, and obstacles were put in place that perhaps didn't really need to be there within the group. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, you know, I call it shooting ourselves in the foot. You know, we get into a position where it looked like, okay, it's going to be smooth sailing from here on in, and you know, it would get sabotaged. You know, because in the opinion of certain members of the band, you know, success is like a betrayal of your ideals. You know, to succeed in the music business means you're a lesser artist. I mean, a true mark of an artist is to die poor in the gutter. You know, I mean, actually, there's an interesting, I mean, it seems obvious enough, but in that Moon Age Daydream film, there's a quote from Bowie, and they say, well, what do you tell people that, you know, say you sold out because of this Less Dance? And he said, you know, poverty is no mark of artistic genius. So, you know, that doesn't, you know, it doesn't make you a great artist because you're poor. You say, you know, like some of the greatest artists in history were financial successes. But, you know, there was always that in the TUXEDOMOON. There was this, you know, that continues. And of course, that's a bitter taste. It really, you know, all therapy and meditation have helped me deal with it, but it's always there.
Well, I guess in 1982-ish, there was a sort of a fork in the road. And I think one of the projects that was being dangled was doing an album with Crepuscule that then might well be licensed through Island Records, which would have certainly given it a promotional and distribution heft that it wouldn't have had. But I think there would have been an expectation there to make a record that had some definite commercial potential in it. But what the band did, in fact, is not do that, but decamp to Italy to perform an opera without words in Italy, which is eventually made a great album, but probably wasn't the most commercial route to take. I don't know, did that seem was that a watershed for you? Is that one of the reasons why you left the group for a while?
But that's the reason. That is absolutely the reason. You know, I mean, at that time we had this big ugly van that JJ had bought, this big gray beast. And Stephen and I were driving around Brussels discussing this proposal we had from Michelle, and you know, it was the only thing on the horizon, right? There were no gigs, there were no tour, there was no other record. This was the next project we were being offered. And you know, and also there was a sum of money. I don't know what it was, $50,000 or something like that. I said, let's do it. You know, let's go for it. And in my mind, I said, if this motherfucker turns down this gig, I am gone. You know, I'm gone. Because, you know, but I could not abide. And I don't want to, you know, go off on Stephen, which I have a tendency to want to do. But I mean, what did I see? I don't know, some movie the other night, TV show, and some guy said, "Oh, money means nothing to me." And the other person replied, "People that say that are people that have always had money. People that tend to say, oh, money has no meaning flying out this." I mean, I'm from fucking poor Mexican people. You know, the fact that I am where I am is due to my own ability and my own, you know, tenacity.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you've not got where you are having always made a living from being a musician for the last, probably getting on for 50 years. It's always been completely on your own terms and your own talent. And I mean, it's not been an easy ride all the time, but it's absolutely down to you and, you know, you alone, you know, with Tuxedo Moon as well. But I mean, you're one of the, I mean, I'm still running, I took over stewardship of Crepuscule 10 or so years ago, and it's been an honor and a privilege to continue to release records by you. But also not many of those original people are sort of match fit enough to continue making really good records. You do the soundtracks, you do the song-based records. Sometimes I think you write too much music, but nevertheless, it still floods out of you. But a lot of people can't really do that anymore. And that's become a little bit of a problem for me because, you know, it's a smaller pool of people who can make a record. I mean, I don't want to release hobby records by people that sort of sound a bit like half-baked demos. Thankfully, you're one of the people who can still make great records. But I suppose thinking more about that island fork in the road, it's perhaps ironic that Tuxedo Moon's best known song now is In a Manner of Speaking, which wasn't written by you or Stephen. It was written by Winston Tong, who wasn't so much of a songwriter, but he wrote that very, very simple song that has a real universal message and is very easy for people to understand all around the world. And millions of people know it. How strange.
Well, Stephen, Winston is a good lyricist. I mean, this is something I came to appreciate because when Tuxedo Moon reformed in 2000, I ended up singing a lot of Winston songs in the live show, and I sang Again, for instance, and I gave my own vocal treatment. And I began to appreciate Winston as a lyricist. I mean, he was quite a poet. He was quite a talented lyricist. And I mean, when we went back to San Francisco in 2005, and Mark financed it, which seems an impossible dream now for a record company to pay for you to go live in San Francisco for 3 weeks. A lot of the reason I wanted to do that, and I proposed it to Stephen, was to work with Winston. to like dig him up, get him to write some songs. And so we were there for the whole time we were there. We were meeting every day in this rehearsal studio. And we invited Winston along, and he didn't come. He didn't come, he didn't come, he didn't come. And finally, on the last day before we left, before we came back to Europe, he showed up at the rehearsal. And so, okay, we set up a microphone for him and a chair. And he sat down in the chair and with the microphone over him like that. And he sat there, like 3 hours, didn't say a word. And then at one point, just before we finished, he looked up at the microphone and went, "Oh." That was it. That was it. That was the extent of Winston's contribution to that session,
Sounds like a Sid Barrett scenario. You mentioned Mark there. That's Mark Hollander of Cram Disques. And I think it's only fair to say that we're talking about Crepuscule and Tuxedo Moon as if that was, that was the main game in town. But Mark Hollander and Cram Disques have released many subsequent Tuxedo Moon records and have done it very, very well and have stood by the band for 35 years now. So I have to extend a huge amount of respect and admiration and credit to Mark and Crammed. And Crammed was always the other really interesting, well-dressed, international-looking indie label in Brussels. And what's more, they're still there. They're still doing it. Whereas Crepuscule's had a more patchy career over the last 40 years.
Well, I mean, Mark, Aksak Mabul has a new life. His band, and it's well deserved. I mean, that's the thing. Mark is a really excellent musician, really brilliant musician, and he put his own musicianship, on the back burner for years to run that record label, and he never made music. He maybe played piano at home, and finally he just said, I want to play music again. And so they started doing their bands again, and it's been doing really well. It's been getting reviewed and pitched for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I've nothing but respect for Mark. I didn't get on with him very well when I lived in Brussels at the time because I was a stupid, young, arrogant idiot. But hopefully I've made my peace with him in subsequent years, and I always enjoy seeing him when I do see him.
I like it. I mean, he's all of these people, they're old friends by now, even including Jean Piero and his crew in Italy. I mean, they're like family, even though they haven't found a gig for me for like 2 years. They kind of dried up, as if they were ever so fertile to begin with. But yeah. So there we go. I mean, I have these questions here about the current state of things. I mean, I don't know how interesting that is. I mean, I have more fun talking about the past, like most old people.
You sent me 3 questions, which were basically about how do you find running a record label? What's the current shape of the music business? What's been the effect of Brexit?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd answer all of those really in one answer. I mean, I think the Brexit thing, I mean, it's a national disaster, but I don't think it impacts hugely for me anyway, partly because so much of music and music selling now is digital and there aren't any borders involved in that at all. So I don't think that Brexit's really affected us that much. I think the general economy has affected things more. But I think for me, the issues and problems I have with running a label these days is that this is going to sound very, very negative, but I think there are too many people making and releasing too much music on too many labels over too many different platforms. And there's just too much for everybody to absorb. It's made music too commonplace and it's kind of devalued it. There are ways round that. You know, you can release nice deluxe boxed editions of things, which are sort of like hardback publishing. That can work quite well. But I think music was probably more valued and more precious to people when there was less of it, and you had to go and find it. It was harder to find it, and it was like secret knowledge, and that was part of the process of investing in it. I think for me, that's taken a lot of the fun out of it. And now I just see myself not as someone who's running an active label and putting out new records as well as catalog. At the moment, I'm really just keeping core catalog in print and curating that catalog, because it's not difficult to put a new record out by someone, but it's very difficult for it to be anything other than, frankly, a waste of time, because it just doesn't get noticed. Few people hear it because there's just so much other noise in the background. Rather like television now, there are so many channels and networks making so much content, you can't possibly keep up with all of it. And, you know, not all of it's going to be high quality. As I said, I mean, I like curating high-end editions of things. So doing a nice multi-disc vinyl set is good. We did probably one of the things that I think we've done best, and I was most happy to do a couple of years ago, just at the beginning of lockdown. We did a 40th anniversary edition of From Brussels with Love, which was the first Crepuscule release, this amazing international cassette magazine with lots of factory artists, lots of minimalist musicians, interviews on it. And we did a fantastic earbook edition of that. So it was like a 80, 90 page hardback book with 2 CDs. It was a lovely thing to do. And that I really enjoyed, but it's incredibly time consuming coming up with projects like that now. And I suppose going back to the Brexit issue, it did make me think I probably need to reevaluate where my career is going, because it might get a bit tricky from now on, running a label full time. So that did provoke me to go back to my old job, which was being a lawyer. And that's what I pretty much do full time now. And running the labels is just a hobby. I don't draw any salary from it. So I have less time to do things now than I did before. But I've also just decided to focus in on what works and those core catalog items that I really need to keep in print in lots of different formats, because that's what they deserve. So I've kind of wound down a bit, and I touched on it before as well. I don't want to put out mediocre records by people. That would tarnish the brand names for Crepuscule and Factory. So I've kind of circled the wagons a little bit, but not really for commercial reasons. I'd like to think it's more for creative and cultural reasons. I don't know. You may say to me, that sounds like bullshit. I'd appreciate your view on that.
Oh, well, I mean, what I think about the state of the music business now is maybe it's analogous to the printing press. I mean, when the Gutenberg, you know, had the monopoly, you know, they invented the technology and few people had it, you know, and so any printed book, you know, would have enormous attention. Say, look, a book, you know, no man write this book. It's made by a machine, you know. But then several hundred years later, you know, the world is flooded with printed garbage, and so, you know, it's not unique anymore. And so, you know, when musical recording of music, you know, high quality recording of music was new, when like Les Paul is inventing multi-track recording, the first products thereof are going to be held in enormous, you know, regard. People are going to say, wow, and look what the Beatles did. They did 24 tracks of audio, and it's amazing. And now, you know, some dope in his basement can have 50 tracks of his own voice easily enough. And that's not to say that it's inferior what he does. It's just that the technology that allowed a few people to get rich while it was still new has become so widespread that it's no longer possible to become, you know, massively wealthy off of this. And so music reverts to where it always was in the past. And so, you know, you're going to be playing in a bouzouki band in a taverna, earning your living that way, rather than having like a private jet to fly you around, you know, rather than being like a demigod. I mean, you're still you're going to make music the way it always used to be made, and it's going to be based upon your ability to do it. I think the days of the rock star are kind of over.
I mean, I still listen to some new music. I mean, there are current artists that I really like, but what about you, Blaine? I mean, who do you rate who's making music at the moment, old or new?
Well, you know, I surprised myself that I actually liked St. Vincent. Because I like her guitar playing. I mean, I was listening to one of her songs, and it you know, kind of poppy and sounded kind of Gaga-esque. And then comes the guitar solo. I said, wow, how did she do that? And so I investigated it, and some of the stuff on the Wounds and Blessings is St. Vincent inspired, you know, to do this kind of synthesizer distortion of guitars, these like wild solos on guitar or violin, you know. I like her. I like a few of the bands I've seen around, you know, some of them tend to be good. I don't know. It's strange what you know makes it through the front door of my ear. I mean, it depends on who it is. I mean, what is the name? Well, there's this. Are they Scottish? A band called the Sound Carriers.
News to me.
They do this kind of 60s sound music. It sounds like music from like French films, like you know, and it has that strange kind of, you know, European and continental soundtrack quality to it. And I like some of that stuff, and I aspire to that stuff. And I aspire to that kind of sound. This kind of twangy guitars and, you know, big orchestras, and, you know, I like it lately. But
do you think there's a danger, though, with music of that type, that it's an exercise in style rather than something that's, I don't know, perhaps at a higher level, sounding a bit snobby?
Well, you know, I mean, what I'm doing now in my work, I mean, it's all about style. I mean, I want to learn how to emulate the production styles and techniques and arrangements of all kinds of different music that I've heard in the past. And, you know, I say, how do they do that? How do they get that sound? I mean, the more I learn about recording myself, I mean, the more I learn about digital audio, the you know, the more I want to just be able to be taken down this whatever path the song leads me. You know, that's another thing. I mean, I'll start working, and, you know, things start to appear. You know, things start to appear in the soup, right? And they become a path to follow. And I end up doing all kinds of different things as a result. And I want to know how to do it. I mean, to a certain extent, it also has a lot in common with parody. I mean, this is one reason I'm a big fan of Neil Innes, and I'm also a big fan of the Mighty Boosh. And this guy, Julian, what's his name? The other guy, not Noel Fielding.
Julian.
Not the gothy dude, the other one.
Yeah, Julian Barrett.
Julian Barrett, yeah, he writes the songs, and he's a guitar player, like a fusion jazz guy, but he is so good at approximating all these different styles of music. I mean, you know, they got this funk song or whatever, it's a we got the funk, and it's so good, you know, and that's why I like him, and that's why I like Neil Innes. I like well executed parody, you know.
It's really interesting you say that, because for me, almost any comedic element in music completely bursts the bubble for me and takes me right out of the music, and I can't appreciate it save as comedy. But a couple of weeks ago, I went to see a group called Eels, who I've got quite a lot of albums by, but I hadn't seen them before. And the group is really just one guy, a guy called Mark Everett, who's American, been around for quite a while now. And I mean, he is a very interesting songwriter and a very charismatic guy. A lot of it's quite down and depressing, but he also has an enormous amount of irony and humor and intelligence in the music. And it just, for me, keeps on the right line of not going into it being comedic. So I really, really appreciate him. But usually the kind of stuff you're talking about, I might appreciate it, but I don't appreciate it as music. It's some sort of other form of entertainment. If you're talking about...
Well, what I appreciated is the skill of the parody. I mean, a lot of my stuff borders, you know, is ironic, but it stops short of being comic, you know, because it's not made for comic effect. You know, I mean, there's a kind of very extremely dry humor and irony, you know, and that's something I've always just really loved, you know. You can hear the through my work with TUXEDOMOON, and like holiday for plywood and things like that.
Yeah.
We're all kind of parody in its way, or appropriation, you know, just learning how to do, you know, it's like applying different colors to, you know, to having a large palette, you know. And what else was I going to say? I forgot. Doesn't matter.
Well, I think we've gone. Oh, let me just have a look. I think we've gone through all the questions you sent me in advance that I was prepared to answer. Is there part of this session? Is there a piece of music involved? Is that something I get to hear? Am I expected to pass comment, stroke judgment on that? What's the...
Well, every conversation inspires a song. So it could be with lyrics, it could be without. It's completely up to Blaine.
Well, I mean, I was working on a piece of music today. I mean, maybe that'll be it. I mean, maybe I'll write lyrics that explore this idea of, you know, nostalgia and the past, and you know, maybe that'll be a good way to use this. I mean, I don't necessarily want to write a song. Oh, Crepuscule, tu étais dans les meilleures étiquettes en Bruxelles, je te manque. Oh, baby.
No, I think James should be, you know, figure prominently in the lyrics.
Yeah, okay. James, James. Say hello to these guys. Look at them. He wants to walk on the keyboard. Sometimes I think he knows how to stop the music. I mean, sometimes if I'm doing something that he doesn't appreciate, he'll be going, you know, especially when I do like guitar solos. He'll walk up here and put his foot on the space bar and he stops it all.
Do I get to direct or shape the piece of music at all? Do I get to say, you can do this, but you can't do that? You've got to do this. You can't play that? Or is it, am I completely extraneous in that regard?
I think you're inspired. Your work stops now, usually. Otherwise, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. And
well, whatever I do, I will send it over.
If Blaine is open to it, then of course.
I mean, I'll send it over for your editorial comment. You know.
Yeah.
He isn't open to that. Back in the 80s, Blaine did an album called Book of Hours. And for about an hour, I was supposed to be the producer. And I didn't last very long in the studio, did I, Blaine?
I remember you were telling me, I remember in particular, you were telling me what you thought the drum pattern should be. And she said, here it should go dun dun instead of dun dun. Okay, I'll do dun dun. But
I don't remember that, but I do remember, I think it probably was the point of my dismissal from the studio. I think you did say one of the reasons why this wasn't going to work is I think you said, you listen to Fleetwood Mac.
oh, now I do. Now I do. Now I put Fleetwood Mac on my phone and listen to it while, you know, commuting on the bus. God help me. And I appreciate it, you know, I appreciate the production value. You know, it's strange, and I don't know how I ended up there. Speaking of Book of Hours, I don't know what I was looking for. Oh yeah, this guy Hector, you know Hector, the Portuguese dude. He's writing something about how he thought Book of Hours was a masterpiece, and he liked Saint-Thérèse. And I'm trying to find the name of the other guy that besides Ivan Georgiev. What was that guy's name? Ian Devine.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to find his name, and I ended up finding a review of the record by this guy Ned Raggett.
Yep.
The all music guy. He did not like that record at all. And, you know, he's going on about it or what he thought were the weak points, you know, and how he thought that zombie bop song was, he called it yuppie funk. And then he didn't like that record very much at all.
But that's because he knows that I was sacked as producer. I know Ned. So maybe there was a conversation before he penned that. No, there wasn't. I'm lying, of course.
No, but I mean, it made me want to go back and listen to it and think about it and listen to some of those other things. Also listen to Byzantium, you know, I know because he didn't like Byzantium either. He thought it was weak, and maybe it was. But the thing that obsessed me at that time and continued to do so was the process of making it, you know, because I was making those records with this sequencer technology that was available at the time. And I was completely absorbed in that sequencer more than, you know, think. So why don't you just play that on the guitar? I say, but I want to program it. I want it so much fun. And I sit there and I wouldn't even program in real time. I was programming, you know, notation, you know, step time.
I'm going to be a bit controversial here, though, Blaine. And if I pick up Night Air again, which I would say is your signature album, that wasn't made with a sequencer. That was made with a Michael Belfer. And then
that's because there was a whole crew of musicians on that, and it made me think back about it. I mean, I don't know. That was also probably part of my retreating inside myself and like my hermitage. You know, I mean, Night Air came at a very special time. I was very kind of lucid. You know, right after I left TUXEDOMOON, even though those other assholes are on that record all over the place. I mean, Steven's there, and it was pretty much just an offshoot of TUXEDOMOON, Night Air. I mean, and Belfer came over to play with TUXEDOMOON, and, you know, Steven wouldn't have him, so I took him on. You know.
I think also, though, one other aspect of that record is, I might be wrong, but it's your only solo album that has a producer.
Yes.
I mean, what's your view on that? Do you find that a process you wouldn't want to ever engage in again, or was it simply a question of finances, or what?
It's a question of happenstance, really. I mean, I was not making financial decisions at that time, you know. It's just that, you know, I became friendly with Gareth.
This is Gareth Jones, who's famous for Depeche Mode, John Fox, and lots of things, I think.
It's because, you know, John Fox introduced us to Gareth. This is pre-Depeche Mode. John Fox. I mean, we had wanted to do Desire. We wanted to have John Fox involved somehow, and that was the extent of his involvement, was to introduce us to his engineer slash producer, which was a good introduction. So Gareth put a spin on that record that I probably didn't appreciate at the time, in my arrogance and my youthful egotism. You know, I thought I did it all, but Gareth had these amazing ideas to give it a sound. And of course, Michael's input, you know, it cannot be underestimated either. I mean, Michael had enormous input on that record, you know. I think it's a pity. I mean, I did get to talk to him like a week before he died, you know. And then Night Air was a kind of a point of contention between us. And I said, Michael, you know, I credited you with those songs on the record cover. I never tried to do it anyway. He said, I don't want to open that can of worms. And so we talked about other stuff. We talked about guitars, and then a week later, he was dead. So, but yeah, I mean, a lot of that is what gives that record its you know, its quality. Because, you know, then those other records I made over that time, yeah, I could have used these kind of guys. Also, not to underestimate the contribution of Alain Boutier. You know, he was an amazing bass player. I mean, that guy, he played with everybody in Belgium. I mean, he's like the old man of the Belgian scene. But I know he played with Arno and with all those other people too. And so his contribution was enormous to that record. You know. Also, I heard the recording, the live recording before the live record, the one we did at the Bataclan. Man, I wish we would have made that the live record, because that's fucking amazing. That's great. I have a cassette recording of that I posted on Patreon. You know.
What, a proper recording or like a bootleggy thing?
Well, it's bootleggy. It's a cassette. And so, you know, I had to tweak it to a certain extent, but it's not bad. So yeah, I mean, I missed having a band of that caliber, you know. Also, of course, I was fucked up. I was on drugs, and there's no question about that, you know. I was a victim of my own disease. I was lost in my addictions, you know.
But it didn't stop you being productive. I mean, you were still making records, you were still touring and playing live a lot.
Yes, but you know, I was deluded. I mean, you know, I was like a lot of drug addicts, you know, and I didn't know which way was up. I mean, thankfully, I've come through that, and my mind is more or less intact. You know, I managed to get through all of that shit and leave it behind me. You know?
Well, it's kind of ironic because, I mean, we've probably had this conversation before, but when I was living in Brussels, certainly towards the end, so this would have been sort of 1991. Actually, no, maybe before that. But anyway, if I'd had to have bets with people about who would die out of these old musicians in Brussels, it would have been Blaine. And, you know, people didn't think you were going to make Old Bones. You'd already, you know, walked under a car in Amsterdam, and, you know, that there were some issues. And I think it came as an astonishing surprise, but a brilliant one, that after you moved to Athens, you got not just clean and sober, but someone who does yoga, someone who rides around on bikes, someone who you know, is still making lots of very good music, and you know, is completely compos mentis. And it's fantastic that you've done that.
Well, you know, I came to my senses, and I owe a lot of that to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I that truly saved my life. You know, I won't hear a word against AA. It's something that works, you know, for people that really are sincere. You know, it initiates a process of self-examination that can help you come out of the kind of zombie trance that your addiction just puts you in.
Was that something you started engaging in Brussels, or was that a Greek thing?
I started going to AA in like 1981. I mean, I went, and it didn't work. You know, I went and kept going back. And unlike at the time I did Night Air, I had been sober for a while, you know, because I had been going to AA. And then, you know, I relapsed, you know, and then I would go back. And then finally, it was only finally when I got here, I started going to AA also just because I was so lonely after JJ died. I mean, I just needed a group of people that I could talk to in my language, and then it also saved my life here. I mean, it gave me a foothold, taught me how to get around in the city, and also helped me, you know, to regain my agency in the world, you know. So yeah, the AA was the same way. I run into other musicians, and, you know, I have like AA buddies, and you know, you can kind of smell them across the room. You know, guy sitting in front of a club soda, you know, in a dressing room full of inebriates. One guy sitting there, though.
So would you have changed anything over the last, in terms of your career, would you have changed anything over the last 40, 45 years?
Well, probably that. I wish that I had got off drugs sooner. That's all. I mean, it fucked me up good. You know, then like one of around the time I made that live record, I mean, that was kind of the beginning of my downfall. You know, up to that point, things were going pretty well in my solo career, but I was that night I was really stoned. I kind of blew it, and I would change that.
Well, but that's just that's kind of wrong, because it's actually a very good live album. But
it is good. It is good, but I get the feeling that everybody I was working with lost faith in me.
Right.
You know, that's the thing. You know, if we had continued at a kind of, you know, accelerated pace, it might have been another story.
I mean, it's interesting you say that's your only regret, because I was really hoping you were going to say you not producing Book of Hours, but you didn't throw that in. I'm very disappointed. Blaine, that's a dagger to the heart of our friendship. No, I think probably that would be a cause for rejoicing that I didn't manage to wreck that album with a bunch of not even half-baked ideas.
Well, I know you didn't, and you were not particularly in love with Stefan Kramer as me.
I don't remember that. You might be right, but I don't remember that.
So you thought his contributions were kind of banal. I think maybe it's just after what Gareth did, you know, that this guy was kind of, you know, vanilla. He's kind of ordinary rock and roll.
I still have too high standards, but I mean, that's the only time I've ever tried to involve myself in anybody's recording sessions. I've never, ever been into the studio with anybody else. I just don't see that as my role or something I would have any contribution to make at all. So I just thought I'd throw that in case people think that I try and influence everybody's records. I absolutely don't do that. But that's why I think I've always really mainly done a reissue label, because I like to judge in retrospect what is good and what suits my worldview of music and my niche labels, rather than trying to commission too much new music, which can go in a direction you didn't expect.
Well, it's been good to have you over the course of all this time as a kind of an editor, I mean, as you know, somebody to provide me some kind of insight into what I'm doing. You know, I mean, that's useful, I mean, especially if you work alone. You know, you got nobody else to tell you. You know, and my wife can't tell me much about these things. You know, you like that? Yeah, or no. She tells me she makes some suggestions, you know. And it's good to have like an editor. It's good.
Is the next record coming out?
What?
What is the next record coming out?
We're not talking about that because it's coming out on another label. So we're just going to move rapidly on.
Well, you know, I mean, there's plenty of stuff.
Now let's hear about the new record. It's on an Italian label, isn't it, Blaine?
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. Well, you want to look at it. You've seen it.
I thought the cover art looked really nice, actually.
Yeah, it's my wife did it. Here, wait a second. I have my merchandise box over here.
This is the hard sell part of the.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
a link flashes up on the screen now.
Well,
yeah.
That's lovely. I look forward to receiving one of those.
Well, now I have some time. Like, while I've been working in the theater, I just haven't been able to do anything else. You know, the theater is really that it just absorbs all the time. And you know, I'm 70 fucking years old. I don't have that much energy. I have enough energy to do one big thing every day, and you know, that's about it. And so the theater just took over everything, all of my bandwidth. You know, now I'm finished. It's 5 months. It's amazing. You know, it's 5 months of commitment to that.
Do you think one of the reasons that you've carved a niche doing soundtrack music, I suppose music that's commissions, really, because we've done 2 albums that are called commissions, is that you're able and you appreciate the benefit of someone can say, can you do this project and it needs to be delivered by this date, blah blah blah, and you will do that, rather than it becoming a tortuous process that's beset with delays.
Well, yeah, you know, the fact that I've basically taught myself digital music production, you know, I can deliver, and I can do a lot of other kind of parallel jobs. You know, I can do the voiceovers on the trailer for the piece and things like that. I can do all of that work. I can edit it. I can, you know, play it. I mean, I've learned about all that stuff. Also, of course, since I've lived here, I mean, I've had a lot of contacts in the theater world. And a lot of the people that I worked with, you know, 25 years ago when they were young, they're now like the lions of the Greek theater scene. You know, and when I met them, they were young, just getting started, and now they're, you know, directing the National Theater and shit like that. I mean, the guy I just worked with, he used to be the director of the National Theater. He was running this theater that was like the alternative theater in 1999. You know, I met him then. So, I mean, that's given me the opportunity to do these kind of things. You know, it's a lot of work. I mean, this deal about being a live musician who's also playing a part in the play, that's kind of more work than I'd rather not do. That. It's too much fucking work, you know. Too much work. The last thing I did, I mean, I've never done this before. I played the guitar continuously for like 20 minutes at a time. I never did that. You know, I mean, this song's like 4 minutes long. You don't play for 20 minutes, because I did like environmental music on live guitar. There was some pre-recorded stuff, but a lot of it was just kind of twangy, Reininger sounding stuff, which I enjoyed. I mean, I enjoyed really a lot of it. Anyway, that's why I haven't sent you this yet.
No, I'm looking forward to it. It will be added to my very long shelf of Blaine and associated projects.
But you see behind me all the CDs in that Tower of Song there, that's all either mine or TUXEDOMOON. You know.
Well, it doesn't look that big from here, so you need to pad it out a bit with some falsies.
Yeah, there's also boxes in there, boxes full of stuff all over the damn place. Oh, and there, you know, got my merch behind me, those too. Well, I guess this is probably it, right?
Yeah, it's been great, guys. Really, just to hear you guys reminisce, and I feel like I visited Brussels a few times, and I spent a lot of time there as well. But to hear about that evocative time was really, really special.
Well, I hope it wasn't too indulgent. I mean, I don't know how long we've been talking, but the last time I did something vaguely like this was in February. And beside me on the stage was like a timer clock counting down to 45 minutes. And I kept looking at it, and it was really distracting because I was thinking, well, I've got to try and cram this point, that point in, and this digital clock's just ticking down, and then people are going off on funny tangents. So it's been really nice just to be able to have a nice freewheeling, improvised conversation, and to actually know that I do know what I'm talking about in this one.
Yeah. So you're an expert.
Because I was there. But I've really, really enjoyed it. And hopefully there's been a bit of talk about wider things rather than just two old geeks talking about 40 years ago in Brussels.
Yeah, we launched into a song.
Yes. So anyway, I may just take the current shred that I'm working on and use it to this end. I mean, I recorded the guitar part just before we started this, and we'll see where it goes. It's going to need some lyrics, and so I'll write some lyrics and see how that.
Yeah, we have a.
Can I give you a title? And you could take this away. You could call it Interferences, and it could either be something to do with the cafe bar that Crepuscule ran in Brussels, or it could be with young idiots trying to interfere with the production of.
Well, with that, I'm always in the market for a good title.
That's a good title.
You know, I mean, well, there's another subject for another day, but I have these phrase generators and these word generators that I use a lot in writing my lyrics. But you know, they are qualitatively different from the AI. I mean, I've tried some of these chat bots and tried to tweak them to get the kind of results that I like, which is kind of this James Joycean Burroughs, and they won't do it. They're too linear. They're too mundane. I mean, they're taking their cue from things that exist already online, and they're very prosaic. They're not magical at all yet. I mean, they're not like the kind of results you get from these kind of cut up and these kind of techniques, these kind of bizarre juxtaposition.
I'll tell you what does really interesting series of 3 words though. There's something we use. I'm a very keen runner, and I do a lot of mapping of runs, and you have to give out locations to people. And there's a thing called what 3 words, which people use to identify very precise locations. It comes down to about 2 or 3 square meters. So if you use that app, you can just pick any location. It can just be a little bit of sidewalk, and it will come up with 3 words that's exclusive to that location. And some of those combinations of words you get from what 3 words are really funny and really interesting. So you might want to check that out.
I'll check it out. I mean, I do have a lot of apps and programs, and they're supposed to do that. I mean, what I would love to have is whatever it was that Bowie used. Bowie had his own software that was written to provide him this kind of cut up stuff, and he didn't share that with anybody.
Oh, really? Really?
Then he had his own, word jumble, word tumbler.
Okay. Okay.
He did that all the time. You listen to his stuff, and you know how that, you know the results of that. You know that almost every song he wrote in his last 20 years of his life was derived from like cut up techniques.
All right.
Anyway,
well, I've really enjoyed this. It's fantastic. Thank you, Blaine. Thank you, Jack. Really enjoyed it. Hopefully, I don't know if you just use all of this or edit out, you know, the bits that aren't so exciting, but I don't know if I will listen to it back, but it's been really, really fantastic.
who knows? I'll do what I did already with some TUXEDOMOON interviews, and I'll put them in a song.
All right. Well, look, thank you. It's been an absolute delight and a pleasure. Thank you. Really, really good.
Real pleasure, guys.
We'll talk again
very soon. Thank you. Thank you, Blaine. Thank you, Jack.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Voilà la vie, avec un fleuve enterré qui coule sous les pavés. Ciel de plomb, bas en dessous de la place dorée. Bruxelles des années 80. Dans la vidéo bar branché sans un sous sur la roue. Des superstars inconnus. Un long manteau noir. Je suis assis sur une rive lointaine, savourant ce chagrin ancien, perdu dans la musique, déformé par la musique, posant dans le cimetière, debout sous la pluie. Dans la vidéo bar branché sans un sou sur la roue. Des superstars inconnus. Un long manteau noir. Voilà la vie, avec un fleuve enterré qui coule sous les pavés. Ciel des plombs, bas en dessus de la place dorée. Bruxelles des années 80. Dans la vidéo bar branché ou sans un sous sur la roue. Les superstars inconnus. Un long